because I generally believe that the way in which you sustain a democracy and enhance the conversation about democracy is to make speech absolutely free. And I think that the restraints on speech come about, first of all, in the exchange of dialogue and argument. That I would say something and somebody would then issue a statement and say, we do not disagree, we disagree with this and we condemn it. That's one way in which our societal values is checking speech. Not through criminal law. Because once you invite criminal law in the process, then one of the things you're going to create is that you're going to create an economy of fear around speech. If the real intent of the law is to focus on just avoiding situations of provoking the breach of peace and removing sort of the emphasis on language or anything, it might create a better way for us to think through what do we mean when we say a person is provoking a breach of the peace in a particular scenario. In many instances, it just resolves to the person has insulted. And so we say that that is sufficient. But I don't think that speech rights is trying to create a scenario where we cannot use insults in everyday life. That's not its intent. So that's where I worry about. But the broader thing, and one of the things which we fear falling into a trap of, is particularly if you read the language of what we have repealed on the criminal libel laws. We may read it and we say, but it is trying to prevent a person's reputation from not being injured. What is wrong with that? But law's purpose can be supplanted by either under-enforcement or selective enforcement. And that process might reduce or diminish what we're trying to create by it.
If what existed or the justifications made in the memorandum are anything to go by, then we should apply the same justification to repeal this law, because it is not in our interest. And the memorandum was read in Parliament by then Attorney General Nana Akufo-Addo, who is the current president of the country. So for me, if that was the belief then to justify the repeal of those laws, and those same conditions exist now surrounding these very laws, then I think we don't need to waste time to take them off our statute books. There are other laws we can apply to address this issue. So any person who is aggrieved by a publication or of the sort may have recourse to several avenues. One, you can exercise your right to rejoinder under,
which is a constitutional right.
Article 162, Clause 6. You can file a complaint at the NMC, which is also a provision in the Constitution. You can sue for defamation. So, and defamation can be a punitive thing.
This is the law. It is your legal rights. It is your health law. And Kofi Eboah, the General Secretary of the Ghana Journalists Association and Communications, lecturer, Wisconsin International University College, Ghana, and Oliver Barker-Vomawo is lawyer and researcher. And this is part 2 of what we started the last time, press freedom versus false news crimes. Now, I'll welcome my guest on this particular note, because whilst we're debating these issues, particularly the laws that appear to be inimical to our freedom of expression, there was one case and somebody got into trouble for speaking, allegedly for found of offensive conduct conducive to the breaches of peace. It's one of the laws that we spoke about the last time. So as you can see, court remands man for insulting Akufo-Addo. And the story simply, and I'm reading it to you, it says, an Accra Circuit Court has remanded into police custody a 40-year-old tile setter for insulting President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo. Raphael Oko Ankra was arrested after police saw a video posted on social media showing the accused using very unsavory words on the president. He has since pleaded not guilty to the offense, to offensive conduct conducive to breaches of the peace. The court presided over by Mr. Samuel Bright Akwa ordered that Ankara be brought back on May 30, 2023. Assistant Superintendent of Police Maxwell Opong told the court that Ankara lives in Jamestown and that on May 15, the police saw a viral video in which Ankara was seen insulting the president. He said the police had to arrest Ankara because the video was not only vile, but had annoyed and agitated the public. The police's intelligence directorate tracked Ankara and arrested him at his hideout at Jamestown in Accra. The prosecution said Ankara admitted the offense in his investigation causing statement and was accordingly charged. But you find later that Ankara's lawyer said differently. So let's begin on this note. So, Oliver, someone is heard insulting the president. They say he used unsavory language and it was vile, and people who were watching that video were agitated. So we need a cohesive society. We need a society where people are disciplined. So what is wrong with this law? When you guys say this is wrong, when the GJA says, let's scrap this law, what do you mean? Don't we need this law to keep society together? Now, remember, you watching us, if you thought this was just about media, this is an example. It's not just about the media. And today we'll open the phone lines for you to join us. Yes.
I think that one of the biggest concerns we have, and I think the last time we had this conversation was what the purpose of the law was.
Right.
It's the intention to stop insults in the society, or that where there's a deliberate threat to breach of peace that it wants to prevent. And sometimes it's not very clear as to which of them we are trying to seek for. From the law itself and its reading, you would think that what it is interested in is preventing the breach of peace. I mean, it's a lot of people taking the law into their hands. And that is where there's a public interest in maintaining a peaceful society or cohesive society. But there's no public interest in preventing insults generally in a society. In fact, one could argue that culturally, insults form a key part of our culture. I know that there's a lot of publication, for instance, among the Nzima, where there are periods where the community comes out and you are encouraged to insult your leaders, which is a mark of accountability and holding people to account. And I think that there's a fear that we may debase the richness of our culture, which is a reminder of how even persons who are in leadership are no different from us, are also equal to the subjects of, moral auditing. Now, in this particular instance, for instance, one of the biggest tragedies, and I think you highlighted that consistently, that because there's a fear of persistent abuse of the law,
right,
and we cannot seem to develop a framework that checks that abuse, it is itself becoming a nuisance. And if that happens, there's no better remedy to cure the defect than to take away the law. That is where the tragedy is. I think the biggest sell of any law is that it is able to be, it's capable of being implemented without abuse. And if there's it is always very difficult to know when to draw the line or to stop abuse. Then you're in a situation whereby law itself must be rethought in this circumstance.
So I'm starting with you because you are the lawyer. Now, in a portion of this law, which was abolished, repealed in 2001, and Yeboah consistently referred to the memorandum that was used to abolish this particular law, and says if you look at that memorandum, there's no reason why these portions of the law must continue to be on the books. So Section 183A of the Criminal Offences Act, that's Act 29, is rendered this way. Any person who would intend to bring the president into hatred, ridicule, or contempt publishes any defamatory or insulting matter, whether by writing, print, or word of mouth, or in any other manner whatsoever concerning the president, shall be guilty of an offense. This is the law that this president, as the Attorney General in 2001, convinced Parliament to abolish, and they abolished it. So when you take this against 207, which has been used against this gentleman, and which is consistently used, and Yeboah and his guys are angry about. What do you say?
I think that, and I like the fact that it continues to refer to the memorandum, because the memorandum sets for us the contents of law or intervention, in that it translates for us what our broader objectives are as a society and what we are trying to achieve. It goes beyond just narrowing the conversation to only the president's person, but the risk of how it is used to suppress dissent. And because it sets a context where it suggests that we as a society do not want our laws to be used to suppress dissent, even if the language used vis-a-vis the individual is one which we do not normally approve of in normal society, criminal law is not the way forward. That's what the repeal suggests. So to see that we are seeing the same thing being done through the back door by using other remnants of laws, achieving the same purpose, it seems that we are defeating the same step that we as a state decided to take, and what we said that we had reached collectively as a spirit behind our decision to repeal the criminal libel law. And that is where I think the conversation needs, us to be critical about the use and abuse of the law in this instance.
So down squarely with you. We abolished the law that said, if you insult the president, you have committed an offense. So insulting the president is no more an offense. But because Section 207 still exists, it is being used to say, because you have used insulting words against the president, you should suffer.
Yeah, so for me, I think
it's a contradiction.
There's a contradiction. And if we look at the reasons why we had to repeal the law, and look at this very session, there's no reason anybody can convince me that this law is a contradiction. And as I kept saying, once we find the mischief in the law itself, then it should be a basis to take away the law. When I read this story, I was amused. Really, if you go to those communities, and I'm not saying so to try and then justify what the guy said, but if you go to those coastal communities, Choko, Jamestown, La, and those areas, they use what we call Panshimo. They have a tradition.
What is Panshimo?
They sing, they mention people's names, sometimes they are insulting you, and that is their way of life. So when I read the story, I was like, wow, then the police will have to go there and arrest everybody. Because on special occasions, you see these things happening. And myself, one thing I normally do, on a Saturday or Sunday, I could take a ride to Choko and those areas. I just want to feel that way of life. And it is part of them. So I don't really...
I think the two of you have something in common.
And when one of the stories I heard in the Second Republic was how the then Prime Minister K. Bozia was abused by Makula women. When he was passing by, then they will be singing Bozia Nabu Ponti Tomolole Tai. That Bozia's mouth is as thick as the tie of a car. And this had been a norm. I don't see why the police... So for me, if we need to blame any institution for the kind of conversation we are having now, it is the police.
It's the police, not the law.
And I think they have directed our minds to these things. Otherwise, we all thought we had killed and buried the criminal libel law. So if they are now bringing these laws from the back door, then they are part of the blame, or they are also part of the mischief.
If I could jump in quickly.
Yes, please.
There's something he said, which I think is quite interesting, that we have had consistent practice where, for instance, I remember when Mills was in power, and the now Deputy Minister of Finance, then as a law student, had called the president gay and other things.
John Kumar.
But the president intervened and said, no, this is not an offense and I don't think he should be arrested. We have had consistencies where persons in public discourse have sought to advise law enforcement about the application of this law in an attempt to protect the president's decency if anybody insults them. And I think that it's a rich body of, education around that. To continue to see persons being arrested in this context makes one wonder. I am privy and have commended the police, for instance, I know that the police hierarchy sent out notices throughout the police and says if somebody was filming, you don't arrest the person. I'm hoping that they are sending out guidance on how law enforcement should be done, particularly with regard to areas where there's consistent abuse and outcry. They're saying that when you see these things, you do not do X. Perhaps that would enforce it. But also, I think, particularly in this story, and I had a big concern that it has been vetted by a judge. That if on the very face of it, the crimes with which the person is charged do not correspond to what's before you, you have the legal authority to dismiss the charges and let the person go home.
Right.
To go even beyond that and say that I think you'll be safer in police cells, for me was really shocking that we live in a democracy where anybody can contemplate prison cells as some sort of hotel of convenience where you keep a person and say come back in 2 weeks. So I was very shocked that law.
So we should definitely move beyond the police, like Yeboah is saying, that it is the police that is abusing the law. But if the police will take people in the name of this law and present them before a court, it is the court rather that should now be teaching the police that you don't do these things. So the judge who looks at this and entertains it, and like we saw in Noah Dame's matter, in the Radio Adan situation, where the judge, put the guy in for a week or more. It's the judge rather, not the police.
Yeah, we have heard submissions by some other legal minds. For example, a suggestion has been made to the effect that we could get the CJ to issue, a practice note that the court should not entertain such charges anymore, and that will end it there. So you will not even need to repeal or amend the law.
Okay.
My personal view on this matter is that if we have a president who in 2001 was the Attorney General and had gone to Parliament to make a case, and in 2011 had delivered a lecture in South Africa to make a similar case, and in 2001 had addressed leaders of African journalists at Alisa Hotel to make the same case. Why wouldn't he instruct the Attorney General on whose behalf the police
do the
are prosecuting, to tell them that, guys, stop doing this, and it will end everything.
And the reference you make to the president in 2011, is it, in South Africa or so? No, sometime after, when President Mahama was in office, he had actually made a very, strong argument that the incumbent administration was abusing the rights of speech, including those of journalists, by using this particular law. And we applauded him because we knew that he was the one who had led Parliament to appeal the sister, provision.
So we want the president to match his words with action, so that we will believe him. And once that is not happening, we can only presume his silence to mean consent. So if he's not acting, then it is convenient to suggest that he endorses what the police are doing.
So you have made two important statements. That either the president, when someone is brought to court under this law, the president will denounce it, will publicly denounce that and say, like President Mills said, leave John Kumar alone. It doesn't matter that he's called me a gay, I don't care. Leave him, don't prosecute him over it. Either the president will do a similar thing, or he should instruct the Attorney General that don't let the police continue to prosecute under this law, because you are the Attorney General, and if they are prosecuting, they're prosecuting on your behalf. Then Oliver brings an important aspect too, that we shouldn't blame just the police. Earlier, and for a long time, the GJA has been blaming the police for abusing this law. The view he shares is that when the police arrest someone under this law, they take them to a court. And it is the court that remands the people and want to entertain this. So the courts to the judges must also take some blame here. They must see this clearly and discourage the police. And I'll give you an example. The police, for example, have been arresting people for motor offenses, and they impound your vehicle under a provision that does not allow them to impound the vehicle. Like they are going to inspect your license, and you don't have the license, or the license is expired. They don't have a right to impound your vehicle. But sometimes this becomes their default. They impound the vehicle. Some judges complain. I've sat in court where a judge complains in front of the police that this is wrong. I keep talking about it. You guys are not listening. What's wrong with you? So judges should be able to also denounce these things and not entertain them when the police bring it before them. So that's an important thing. But you say there's been a suggestion to you that the CJ can also issue a practice note. Yes. So the GJA, will you take that up and write officially to the Chief Justice, acting now, Jos Doche, maybe in a few weeks to come, we'll have Justice Tokono. You write to her to, ask the judges not to continue to entertain this?
Yes, it is not something bad. We are considering that option, but we will be interested in a permanent solution. My understanding is that if the CJ issues a practice note, it is more or less like a law. So no judge will be required to entertain any such case.
Okay.
But for me, as I keep saying, if the tree will hurt your eye, you don't cut it, you uproot it. And so long as we have mischievous people around who may want to use the law now or in the future to suppress press freedom, then the long-term interest for us is to have the law taken off. But meantime, and we also appreciate the fact that if you want to repeal the law or if you want to amend or any of such processes, it may take time.
All right.
But we may get the CJ tomorrow to issue a note, and that will address the issue.
Right.
So we are open to all the options.
Right. Thank you very much. Remember last week he emphasized rejoinder and civil suit, so that it's not as if when you repeal these laws, these provisions, there's no way anybody can be dealt with. People can take up a civil suit, and people can also do rejoinders, which is a constitutional requirement. Once you do a rejoinder to a media house, they are under obligation to publish the rejoinder as well. Now, the provision that we say now is in contradiction is what you see up there. Section 183A of the Criminal Offences Act, Act 29, 1960. It says, any person who, with intent to bring the president into hatred, ridicule, or contempt, publishes any defamatory or insulting matter, whether by writing, print, word, or word of mouth, or in any other manner whatsoever concerning the president, shall be guilty of an offense. That offense was a misdemeanor offense, which meant that you could go to jail for a maximum of 3 years. And you could also be made to pay a fine of about 9,000 cedis. This is no more law. It's been abolished since 2001. So the question now is, why are people being arrested for insulting the president under another law, which the GJA people like Oliver have been campaigning that it should be abolished. And you were fortunate to get Justice Dennis Ajay of the Court of Appeal and also of the African Human Rights Court to support that this should be abolished. Okay, now tied to this, Oliver, my question is, so we abolished this law in 2001. Then in 2008, we passed the new Chieftaincy Act. And in that new Chieftaincy Act, if you insult a chief, even by conduct, you don't have to use specific words of insult. If you insult a chief, even by conduct, you could go to jail for about 3 months or pay a fine. What's wrong?
You know, I think that one of the, and I follow the conversation around why this was introduced. And the suggestion was that customarily, it offends custom to insult a chief. And I think that a lot of people forget that the reason why a law like Section 183A existed was that it followed in the same thinking. That there was a point where the head of state, you know, the queen or the king, was in the same position as, you know, our cultural states, where it was felt that you could not insult the dignity of the king. And this was transported to the presidency as well. Now, if thinking has evolved, that with regard to the presidency, we are removing this, or we are decriminalizing this, then that thinking must translate as well into the cultural communities that exist within the chieftaincy institutions. To perpetuate one in one aspect and to remove the other means that there's no unity of thought in the way in which we are acting. What was our rationale and thinking regarding the presidency, and why that rationale cannot be applied culturally? I think that particularly when it comes to custom, the cultural incentives against insulting chiefs continue to hold, even perhaps stronger than some would say, even when it comes to the presidency. And I think the ways in which those cultural norms, or the ways in which people are raised within their customs, must be respected. Now, I have said, for instance, and I've given the example of the Nzema, she's given the example of coastal communities as well. This is a law that also does not respect certain customs. And I think now Justice Mensah Bonsu has written extensively about the continuous Akanization of Ghanaian customs, which is that we take one reference point and we uniformize it across the entire country. And we forget that we're a country which brings together over 40 different ethnicities. And that there's uniqueness in the way in which all of them approach their cultural institutions. And I think there's a mistake we make again here in the Chieftaincy Act, that we bring back the same thing that we are trying to kill and create another avenue. Now, I don't discount that there's thinking that in certain places that this can lead to real conflict, that people hold a certain, you know, attachment to cultural institutions in a way that tends to create conflict, and so we have to manage it in certain ways. I have very seldom believed that prison is the way in which you reform attitudes around this. That the fear of 3 months would lead a person to say that because there's 3 months penalty, I would not engage in a particular conduct. No, I think that the more you reinforce cultural education holistically, the more people are disinclined to engage in certain conduct, I think.
Right. So you join us shortly and share your views on this particular situation. In 2001, we abolished the law that said if you insult the president, you have committed an offense, you could go to jail for 3 years, a maximum of 3 years, and you could be paying a fine of 9,000 or 9,000 plus, go to jail from 1 day, 1 week to up to about 3 years. Then in 2008, we did a law and we said if you knowingly use disrespectful or insulting language or insults, or you insult a chief by word or conduct, you have committed an offense. You could be paying up to 2,400. That's a current law. That's not abolished. You could be paying 2,400 and or go to jail for 3 months. Now, what's the contradiction here? and the law we abolished in 2001, we have its sister, you know, or brother in the same law, for which people are still being punished for insulting the president in the name of conduct that is conducive to the breach of the peace. We'll open the phone line shortly for you to join us, because this is the reason we extended the discussion, because the last time we couldn't take your calls. This is the law. It's your health law. It's your legal light. And my guests are Oliver Bakavomo. He is lawyer and researcher. Kofi Ebua is General Secretary of the GJA and Communications Lecturer, Wisconsin International University College here in Ghana. So, we didn't seem to spend sufficient time on the what's that law? Electronic Communications Act. The Electronic Communications Act, Section 76, says a person who by means of electronic communication service knowingly sends a communication which is false or misleading and likely to prejudice the efficiency of life-saving service, or to endanger the safety of any person, ship, aircraft, vessel, or vehicle, commits an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine not more than 3,000 penalty units. A penalty unit is 12 Ghana cedis. 3,000 penalty units, or to a term of imprisonment of not more than 5 years. So, in 2008, we passed another law, and the punishment has even been enhanced to 5 years. It says a person is taken to know that a communication is false or misleading if that person did not take reasonable steps to find out whether the communication was false, misleading, reckless, or fraudulent, and concludes by saying subsection 2 does not apply to the operator or provider of a network or service over which a communication is sent. The GJA, again, together with other media practitioners and watchers, say this law must also go. Why should it? Oliver.
Let me make a general point first. I find it interesting that we are talking about the Chieftaincy Act and then the Electronic Communications Act, and they both passed in 2008.
That's right.
And I find it curious, you know, because 2001 is the beginning of the Kufuor presidency, and then 2008 is at the end of the Kufuor presidency. To see back the return of speech repression, it's really strange, I think. But so I struggle the most with Section 76. And if I have any problems with it, perhaps it's how broad it is. Because I think that all over the world, there's an attempt and an understanding that operation of certain engines, so here he's talking about ship, aircraft, or vessels, that if you do interfere, or there's anything that might interfere with the operation, could cause serious catastrophe. I am uncertain as to whether or not the law achieves the purpose perhaps behind it, and so could open the door to abuse. For instance, he's talking about if your communication endangers the safety of any person, the language and what that means opens a huge door as to what is considering endangering, you know. And I'm uncertain as to where the scope is limited. If it is only focused on anything that could interfere with the operation of a ship or aircraft or vessel, then even I am uncertain as to whether or not limiting it to electronic communications achieves the purpose. An example, which is usually an example which is used where in an airplane somebody shouts fire or something like that, where particularly because of the confined circumstances, it could lead to a stampede and could cause, you know, loss of life. In those instances, I can understand what the law is trying to do. But beyond that, the scope and what the law is trying to achieve beyond that is not very clear to me. I'm not even certain of, examples that have demonstrated this.
Well, when you say if you shout fire,
yeah,
will that qualify? Because it says a person who by means of electronic service.
Yes, exactly what I was saying.
So it must be a text message, WhatsApp, or Facebook, or all other forms of
absolutely
electronic
service. Saying that because
except that it says you will be punished, but the operator of the service will not be punished. So if it is, say, MTN, Vodafone, or they are safe, you are the one who used it.
No, I see an attempt in a way to perhaps the electronic communications industry must have pushed back a bit on that. But yes, I think that the scope of it and what it's trying to do, it doesn't do so elegantly. And so it potentially leaves out things which have traditionally been criminalized in many jurisdictions. And it's unclear, that's why I struggle to find an example of what exactly it's trying to achieve here. I don't know whether, for instance, if it is targeting persons who are in the control tower and might send some misleading information or false information to the aircraft operator, I'm uncertain as to the scope.
Yeah, people use social media. So I get up one, night, and then I start circulating a message either on Facebook or WhatsApp, and I say that perhaps we understand that there's going to be an earthquake within a particular zone, and then it's false, but I throw people into panic and they run out and so on. Won't I have caused trouble? Shouldn't I be punished? Why do you say this should be abolished?
It is a problem. Our concern has been how the law is being applied against the media. And for me, reading this law, I don't see how it has anything to do with the work of the media.
The law is for everybody, so why do you want the media insulated?
So when you read the details of the law, it is not about somebody writing an article or anything. I think the purpose of the law is to address certain needs, and as Oliver mentioned, things to do with aircraft, ship, and so on and so forth. But where increasingly it is being applied against the media, sometimes you sit back and wonder whether the police or whoever is doing the prosecution has any agenda against the media. Let me chip in this. The law of defamation, I know one of the defenses of that law is absolute privilege.
That's correct.
And under absolute privilege, my understanding of it is that if you are qualified for it, and there's a class of people who are qualified for it, it doesn't it doesn't matter whether you were mischievous about what you said. It doesn't matter whether what you said was totally false. Insofar as
you are qualified.
You are qualified.
People like MPs speaking in Parliament, on the floor of the House,
in Parliament,
they get advice or information from all sorts of places, including their constituents.
Yes.
If they stand in there and say whatever they say, yes, you cannot take them on for defamation.
Yes.
Okay.
And I recall the case of Mama Ayariga Honorable when he alleged that some MPs had taken bribe. I recall the first Deputy Speaker, Honorable Joe Osewusu, asking for permission from the Right Honorable Speaker then, Michael Quay, to go and purge him himself. And I guess what he meant to do was to go and sue for defamation, because Honorable Ayariga had made the comments on Radio Gold, not on the floor. But my interest is, why do we even have that protection for a certain class of people? And why must anybody worry that journalists are asking for a protection? Okay, based on the work that we do, based on the role we play in promoting the democracy and development of the country. So I think ours is also a fair call. If the same law can see the need to protect a certain class of people, why not us? But in respect of this particular law, Section 76 of the Electronic Communications Act, I don't see how it relates to media work at all.
Okay. Thank you very much. We are going to pick a call from a lawyer and teacher of this area of the law also, who wants to join us and share some insights onto it. And then I'll pick your calls as well. So if you're trying to call us, we will beg you, just hold on for a briefly. We'll do this and then we will have you join us as well. Is there something you wanted to say whilst we get ready to pick our...
No, when you give the example you gave,
yeah,
and I started to reflect whether or not even this law would be able to achieve that purpose. So you had given an example of a person sending out communication and saying there was an earthquake, and then it came out.
And it was false.
And it was false. I remember that incident. I think also perhaps must have gone into the thinking around this. And I did wonder whether or not that information, for instance, would suffice. First of all, if it is published on, let's say published on social media, does that qualify as sending a communication? Because I said the law has used published in certain instances when it intends for publishing to be the crime. Here it's talking about sending. So presume there has to be a recipient in some regard. Then the other one was about if individuals come out under fear that there's going to be an earthquake, I'm wondering whether or not they have prejudiced the efficiency of life-saving service. It's not too clear to me. And whether endangering the safety of any person, I don't know. Whether, because if the information is presumably false, then there's not going to be any earthquake anyway. So if you're coming out, I don't know. So I've just been reflecting on that. But I think the bigger problem here really is the language and the scope of the law and how it opens up and doesn't really target, I suppose, the mischief it needs to address.
Right. So having referred to the Chieftaincy Act to you again, it means you have one more law you have to add to your campaign. Because previously, if a chief, sent you a summons and you didn't respect it, you are in trouble. You are committed an offense. Now that is no more an offense. Even though this offends our tradition and culture, now that is no more an offense.
But under this law, it could be, because they're saying conduct and words, insult. The chief could perceive your refusal to attend a summons as an insult. Your refusal to take a cap off before the chief can be perceived as an insult, because it's talking about conduct and words.
And again,
bring back
like this Raphael situation, once the subjects of that chief are agitated about what you have done, the police, this case, nobody reported to them. There was no complainant. They may pick you up as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you have a lot of work to do. All right. Joining us is Sami Dako. Sami Dako is a lawyer and also teaches the law on this area. Thank you very much for joining us. What are your thoughts on the calls for the repeal of these various provisions that criminalize speech generally?
Thank you very much, Samson. And let me say hello to your guests, Oliver and Kofi of GJ. I think that if you've also followed my writings, you know that I'm an ardent writer on freedom of speech and expression. Two things I want to clarify, and I agree largely with the submission by Oliver on Section 76 of the Electronic Communication Act, except to say that I don't really understand why the GJA came into this matter of Section 76. But in another breath, I also understand why, because there were some attempts by the police service to try and charge some people who had been arrested under this act. But I do know that they dropped it eventually, because the Electronic Communications Act has nothing to do with one particular group of persons. And it is also very focused. That's why Oliver was saying that he's trying to understand it. Electronic Communications Act, Section 76, is simply a law that was put in place to forestall any false information that will lead or likely to prejudice the efficiency of life-saving service. That is one. Or that can endanger the safety of a person. And then you see a ship, you see a vessel, you see a vehicle. So it's purely to protect life-saving services. So the example that you try to give, that if you say there's going to be an earthquake and there is no earthquake. You may have endangered the life of people if, for instance, those people were in a bus and you sent that communication to someone on the bus and the person caused a panic. Or the person was in a vessel and you sent an information that there's going to be some tsunami or something and then it ended in panic. But if you simply write a story that say somebody is going to die, let me give an example of the Shatawale example. Shatawale is going to die. You cannot be charged under this because there is nothing about it's what you just wrote. It's not distracting the efficiency of life-saving service or endangering the safety of a person. It doesn't at all. On the contrary, I think that what DJs should be focusing on is Section 208 of Act 29, because the fact that police, very enthusiastic police officers or overzealous police officers may have tried to come under Electronic Communication Act does not mean that we should repeal it. I don't believe it should be repealed. I think it should be there because it is targeting specifically.
So the GJA's crusade, supported by, illustrious citizens like Justice Dennis J. Oliver Bakavamo were here, is to Section 207, 208, and the Electronic Communications Act as the provision that we are now talking about.
And I'm saying that the reason why Electronic Communication Act was added was because some enterprising officers of the police administration attempted to come under this.
Yes, but you never know. You never know if they didn't do it now. You never know if they will want to do it tomorrow. So yes, you can preempt it.
They've done it and they have failed. They've done it and they have failed. That's what I'm saying. I've just forgotten the particular case. They've done it and they have failed. It's just like when the police also said they were going to control profit by coming under 208. And they have failed. They went in the case of Jesus and Hofer and they failed in court. Because before you can even bring somebody under 208, you must first of all prove that what the person said was false. Now, how does the police service prove that a person who said that someone was going to die in 2027, how do they prove that in court that it is false? So you end up frustrating yourself because there are elements you must meet. One, that the statement was false, and that the person knowingly said it even though he knew it was false, and all the other variants. And if you cannot prove it as false, how does the trial continue? In the same way, if police decides to bring a journalist who wrote an article about something, like, let's say the case of the one before the Tema court or so, about
Radio Ada.
Radio Ada, and police decide to charge him under this, that he's written a story about Magdan, and that's of course, and that they are coming under Section 76, because the broadcast was through a radio station. How would the police prove this, or how would the Attorney General even prove this? Because this is talking about any force. Well,
in that case, they are using Section 207, offensive conduct conducive to breaches of the peace, and the law straightforward says any person who in a public place or at a public meeting uses threatening, abusive, or insulting words or behavior with intent to provoke a breach of the peace. So there's no question about falsehood, that what you have done will provoke a breach of the peace, or whereby a breach of the peace is likely to be occasioned.
I think that the point I was making was that there's no need for us to be alarmed about Section 76 because some people misinterpreted it. What I'm trying to say is that Section 76 is purely there to protect the efficiency of life-saving services.
All right.
And to protect derailing certain, like Oliver said, certain important aircraft, like planes, ships, and the rest. And as for Section 208 of Act 29, it should have been gone by now, because I said that it is vague and it's subject to.
All right. Sami, thank you so very much. Unfortunately, but thank you for this brief intervention too. We will now forgive us. We intended to dedicate sufficient time for you to call us with your questions as well. But we have some 7 minutes or so. Please call us now and let's have your questions. Those of you who called earlier and your lines, my producers negotiated with you, please, you can call now. Abdul, you called earlier, you can also call us. Whilst we wait for them to, have their bites, if we may hear your concluding comments now before it's too late. Yes, Oliver.
I just pulled up I think what Samuel was referring to, David Tamaklo, editor of WhatsApp News, who had been charged under Section 76 for publication of false news. So I think the police just took the false part of them and charged him. And here, in fact, he was admitted to bail, which means that the court did not view it on the face of it and say, no, they have actually went through the motions. And I see how, particularly in an environment where law enforcement is suspicious of speech.
Please, you can call now. The numbers are on the screen.
Where law enforcement is suspicious of speech, they are scanning through all the provisions and say, where is speech mentioned or anything publication related, and then becomes the basis of charging a person. I think that's where the inherent danger, which goes beyond just the law, but also a question of how we educate law enforcement around speech rights in general.
Okay. Thank you. What do you have to say?
Yeah, I think the point Sami made, I've already shared that point, that we have heard and are considering views from other legal minds. And I mentioned the need for us to also seek the intervention of the CJ for...
Just hold on for us. Hello, Abdul. You're calling us from Amasaman. Let's hear you.
Yeah, something. Good evening.
Good afternoon.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I would like to say that the police are supposed to enforce the law. So my question here is it that the policemen who go to do this arrest doesn't know the law or they abuse the law? Sometimes the law doesn't transcend to the common person. Bear in mind that the law is written in English language and it's not in our local language. And I feel to say some people may not understand the law very well. So the policemen who are supposed to know the law, who have been taking the duties of them to practice the law, rather go and abuse the law. Bear in mind that when police abuse the law, what they get is either they are demoted or they are being sacked from the work.
That's when you are lucky.
Yeah, when a common person abuses the law, he's being jailed for 3 or 4 years or 3 months or something of that sort. So I think the law has to be clear to every person in this country.
All right. Thank you very much. And that's why the law, this program, comes your way every Sunday, so that you are educated, you are empowered. They're spending their precious time here last Sunday, today to help you to appreciate the law. So once you know, you can also, as it were, stand up for your rights or insist on your right. You were saying something.
I was making the point that we agree Section 76 of the Electronic Communications Act is not meant for the media. But I don't think to suggest that the police have failed in applying the law should be comforting enough. That is where we are coming from.
Okay,
that
hold on again. Richard. Hello, Richard. You are calling from Tema. Let's hear you quickly.
I just want to know about you offending a chief, right? Yes.
Say that again.
I said I want to know if you offend a chief and then you are summoned to him and you have to pay some money.
No, you don't pay. You don't pay to the chief. The law is a criminal offense that if you use words or conduct that is insulting to a chief, then you have committed a criminal offense, which means police must come in. Then there will be. We always say there should be arrest. There should not always be an arrest. Then you are taken to a court, and then you are asked whether you are guilty or you are not, and then you go through the process, and you may pay 2,400, or in addition to that, you may go to jail for 3 months.
Okay, so the money goes to the government coffers.
The state, yes.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Richard, he got that clarification. So please continue. Sorry for this.
Okay. So the point I'm making is that it is not comforting to say that the police failed in trying to apply the law. That is where we are coming from. I want to add that a lot of the time people have also asked, what are we doing to also clean up the system? I think the way to go is self-regulation. And we in the media must know that if we need to protect free speech and expression and the work that we do, we should be able to regulate ourselves. But more importantly, I think we also need to address the question of what I call consumer regulation or audience regulation.
Thank you. Lord Jet, what's your questioning?
No, I just want to appreciate what you people are doing. I just want to appreciate what you people are doing. Appreciate what you people are doing.
Thank you very much. Thank you for calling us. This is where all time will allow us. When you were speaking, as if you can say something in some 30 seconds.
No, I was just going to say that I think one of the misconceptions when you're having this conversation is that people think when you're asking for a law to be repealed in this phrase is that you are necessarily endorsing irresponsible speech.
Okay.
That is not the conversation. The conversation is that prison is not the way in which we deal with irresponsible speech. There are so many social checks, civil checks that ensure that persons will be responsible in their speech. And we have to be able to amplify those. That's the point I wanted to make.
And that was very essential to stress. I'm Samson Ladia Yanini. This has been The Law. It's your legal light. It's your health law. And my guests today have been Kofi Ebua, General Secretary of the GJA and Communications Lecturer, Wisconsin International University College, Ghana. Oliver Bakavomawo is lawyer and researcher. Okay, thank you very much. We also were joined by Sami Dako, who is a media law lecturer and a lawyer. Have a good afternoon.